Hello everyone, I am Mr. Raiko May Valdez and we are going to discuss the communicative language teaching. But before that, here's the list of topics that we are about to discuss in this video. Of course, we are going to discuss the communicative language teaching, which includes the goals of language teaching, how the learners learn a language, and the different activities that best facilitate learning, and the roles of the learners and the teachers in the classroom. And also, we are going to discuss the background to communicative language teaching, which includes the traditional approaches, the classic communicative language teaching, the proposals for communicative language syllabus, English for specific purposes, and the implications for methodology. And also, we are going to discuss the different classroom activities in communicative language teaching that includes the accuracy versus fluency activities, the mechanical, meaningful, and communicative practice, the information gap activities, and the jigsaw puzzles. All of these things will be discussed, so all you need to do is to sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Let us first define the communicative language teaching. So communicative language teaching is an approach of language teaching that emphasizes interaction as both the means and ultimate goal of the study. Also, communicative language teaching can be understood as a set of principles about the goals of language teaching, how the learners learn a language, the kinds of classroom activities that best facilitate the learning, and the roles of the learners and the teachers in the classroom. So let us examine each of these issues in turn. So let us proceed to the goals of language teaching. Communicative language teaching sets as its goal the teaching of communicative competence. So what does this term mean? So in order for us to much understand this term, we can clarify this communicative competence by comparing it to the concept of grammatical competence. Grammatical competence refers to the knowledge we have of a language. So it refers to the knowledge of the building blocks of sentences, like for example, parts of speech, tenses, clauses, phrases, sentence pattern, and how sentences are formed. So as you can see, grammatical competence is the focus of grammar practice book. On the other hand, communicative competence is the ability to understand and use the language effectively to communicate in authentic social and school communities or school environments. Therefore, communicative competence is our ability to use the language in interaction to understand the messages and make ourselves understood in turn. Are you still learning? Cool. After learning the communicative competence and grammatical competence, you may now be able to identify the sentences whether they are communicative competence or grammatical competence. Then we are about to discuss how learners learn a language. So I know that it is also one of your questions, how a child learns a language. So in recent years, language learning has been viewed from a very different perspective. So these are the processes, these are sentences that will tell us that interaction is really the key of language learning. If you interact with other people, if you interact using the language, you will definitely learn a language. That through collaboration, it will help you to learn a language. A purposeful interaction using the language will help you to learn a language. So take a note of this. You will fail to learn a language if you will not use the language. Understood? So we are going to discuss the background to the communicative language teaching. Language teaching has seen many changes in the ideas about the syllabus design and methodology in the last 50 years. And CLT prompted a rethinking of approaches to the syllabus, design, and methodology. So, we may conveniently group trends in the language teaching in the last 50 years into three phases. The phase 1, phase 2, and the phase 3. The phase 1 is the traditional approaches up to the late 1960s. The phase 2 is the classic communicative language teaching from 1970s to 1990s, and the current communicative language teaching, which is the phase 3, from 1990s up to the present. Now, let us discuss each phase of communicative language teaching. The phase 1 is the traditional approaches. So these approaches give priorities to the grammatical competence as the basis of language proficiency. So they were based on the belief that language could be learned through direct instruction with the use of practices and drillings. So the approach to the teaching of grammar was deductive. Therefore, this approach, the traditional approach, used teacher-centered approach, where the students are presented with grammatical rules and then given opportunities to practice using them. This approach used different techniques, like for example, memorization of the dialogue, question and answer practice, substitution drills, and other various forms of guided practice or speaking and writing practice. This approach also introduced different methodologies and assumptions, like for example, audiolingualism in North America, or it is also known as oral approach, and the structural situational approach in the United Kingdom, or it is also known as the situational language teaching. To much understand the audiolingualism or the structural situational approach or the situational language teaching, let us put it in this way. Can you still remember or can you still recall when you were in grade school and then when your teacher read a sentence and then the students repeated each word in a sentence? Can you still remember that? Or if not, here's the video and it will help you to understand audiolingualism. Okay class, please repeat after me. This is a box. This is a box. Okay, Clarence, this is a box. Very good. How about this one? This is a pen. This is a pen. Okay, Via.
This is a pen.
Very good. That is audiolingualism. So the students hear first the model dialogue from a teacher or on tape containing key structures of the lesson, and then the students repeat each line of the dialogue individually or in chorus, and then the teacher pays attention to the pronunciation, diction, and intonation of the students, and correction of pronunciation or grammar is direct and immediate. That is situational language teaching, that is audiolingualism, that is oral approach, that is structural situational approach, and that is a traditional approach. Are we clear? Are you still learning? Okay. Also, PPP cycle was being introduced and employed in this approach. What is PPP cycle? Well, PPP cycle is the presentation, practice, and production cycle. How does PPP cycle work? In presentation, the teacher explains the new structures and checks the understanding of the students. And then in practice, the students will now practice the new structure using drills, using different practices, and using exercises. And in production, the students will now be able to use the new structure in their own way. That's how PPP cycle or presentation, practice, and production cycle works. Are you still learning? I hope you do. In addition to this, the PPP cycle was doubted by some scholars. However, PPP cycle was given way too functional under the influence of communicative language teaching theory. Now let us proceed to the phase 2, which is the classic communicative language teaching. So in this time, audiolingualism, structural situational approach or situational language teaching fell out of fashion. Some critics argued and questioned the centrality of grammar in language teaching, and then they believed that language ability involved much more than grammatical competence. In this time, grammatical competence was really out of fashion, wherein you need to produce grammatically correct sentences, and it shifted to the knowledge and skills needed to use grammar and other aspects of language appropriately for communicative purposes, like for example asking gifts, asking permission, asking requests, and so on and so forth. In this time, they don't need grammatical competence. What was needed in order to use the language communicatively was communicative competence. Are we clear? The classic communicative language teaching said that communicative competence and not simply by grammatical competence should be the goal of the language teaching. Also, communicative language teaching created a great deal of enthusiasm and excitement to language teachers and school institutions in rethinking their teaching, syllabus, and classroom materials. Also, in this phase, grammatical competence was no longer the starting point because new approaches were needed. So in the syllabus of this phase, rather than simply simplifying the grammars and vocabulary learners needed to master, it was argued that a syllabus should identify the following aspects of language use in order to develop the learner's communicative competence. First, as detailed a consideration as possible of the purposes in which the learner wishes to acquire the target language. For example, in using the English in business purposes, in hotel industry, or for travel. Second, some of the idea of the setting in which they will want to use the target language. For example, in an office, on an airplane, or in a store. Third, the role of the learners will assume the target language. For example, as a traveler, or as a salesperson talking to a client, or a student in a school. Fourth, the communicative events in which the learners will participate in everyday situation, vocational or professional situations, academic situations, and so on and so forth. For example, making telephone calls or engaging in a casual conversation. Fifth is the language functions involved in those events. For example, making introductions, or giving explanations, or describing plan. Next, the skills like rhetorical skills and discourse skills involved. Like for example, storytelling, or giving an effective business presentation. Therefore, these aspects of language use should be identified in a syllabus. And these aspects of language use led to the proposals for communicative syllabus. So this includes a skills-based syllabus and a functional syllabus. The task-based syllabus focuses on the 4 skills of listening, reading, writing, and speaking, and breaks each skill down into its components micro skills. For example, the skill of listening might be further described in terms of the following micro skills: recognizing the key words in a conversation, recognizing the topic in a conversation, recognizing the speaker's attitude toward the topic, and recognizing the time reference of an utterance. And in a functional syllabus, the learner should be able to carry out in English, such as expressing likes and dislikes, offering and giving apologies, introducing someone, and giving explanations. Aside from rethinking the nature of a syllabus and communicative approach to teaching, CLT also rethinking of classroom teaching methodology. And in this part, we are going to know the principle of communicative language teaching methodology. There you are. So these are the principles of communicative language teaching methodology. So these are: make real communication the focus of language learning. Then provide opportunities for learners to experiment and try out what they know. Be tolerant of learners' errors as they indicate that the learner is building up his or her communicative competence. Then provide opportunities for learners to develop both accuracy and fluency. Then link the different skills such as speaking, reading, listening together since they usually occur so in the real world. And lastly, let students induce or discover grammar rules. In applying these principles in the classroom, new classroom techniques and activities were needed. And as we saw above, so instead of making use of activities that demanded patterns and accurate repetition and memorization of sentences and grammatical patterns, activities that required learners to negotiate the meaning and to interact meaningfully were required. Now, we're down to discuss the different classroom activities in communicative language teaching. So we will briefly review the different or the main activity types that were one of the outcomes of CLT or communicative language teaching. First, the accuracy versus fluency activities. As we can see in communicative language teaching, one of the goals of communicative language teaching is to develop fluency in language use. Fluency is developed by creating classroom activities in which the students will negotiate the meaning, use different communication strategies, correct misunderstandings, and work to avoid communication breakdowns. However, fluency practice can be contrasted with accuracy practice. So these are the differences between activities that focus on accuracy and those who focus on fluency. These are activities focusing on fluency. Reflect natural use of language, focus on achieving communication, require meaningful use of language, require the use of communication strategies, produce language that may not be predictable, and seek to the link language use to context. And on the other hand, these are activities focusing on accuracy. Reflect classroom use of language, focus on the formation of correct examples of language, practice language out of context, practice molds or samples of language, do not require meaningful communication, and controlled choice of language. And these are examples of fluency activities and accuracy activities. Aside from fluency versus accuracy activities, we have also the mechanical, meaningful, and communicative practice. When we say mechanical practice, it refers to the controlled practice where the students can carry out or without understanding or comprehending the language that they are using. So the best example for this would be the substitution drills and the repetition drills. Then, meaningful practice is an activity where language control is still provided, but the students are required to make meaningful choices. For example, the teacher will give the students a street map, and then the students will identify the location of places on the map. Then the students will answer the question, where's the cafe, where's the canteen, where's the basketball court. Therefore, this practice is now meaningful because the students are required to respond according to the location of places on the map. And in communicative practice, these are the activities where the students use the language in real communicative context or real communication context. For example, the students will now be able to draw their neighborhood and then find the location of different places in their neighborhood. This is an example of an exercise in communicative language teaching. As you can see, if students read and practice aloud the sentences in the grammar box, this would be the mechanical practice. Exercises A and B can be regarded as meaningful practice since students now complete the sentences with their own information. And lastly, exercise C is an example of communicative practice since it is an open-ended discussion activity. Are you still learning? Well, I hope you do. We have here the information gap activities. So this refers to the fact that in real communication, people normally communicate in order to get information they do not possess. So this is known as an information gap. So these are the following exercises. Make use of information gap principle. So take a look at this. Then we have here the Jigsaw Activities. So these are also based on the information gap principle. But usually, the class is divided into groups and each group has part of the information needed to complete an activity. So here's an example of Jigsaw Activities. Take a look at this. So as you can see, communicative language teaching has passed through a number of different phases. So from a traditional approach, syllabus, which led to form or to propose a new syllabus, different classroom activities, to a new methodology. Today, in communicative language teaching, the role of a teacher is facilitator, is mediator, who monitor the students' performances. Instead of being a model, they are now the facilitators of learning of the students. Today, the role of the learner is to participate in the different activities in the classroom through collaboration. So they are now engaging themselves in the teaching-learning process. As a teacher, we need to provide a relaxed environment to our students in order for them to grasp and to understand the topics, in order for them to learn effectively. And let us make our classroom one of their safest places. So that concludes our discussion. So before I end this video, teachers, I know that we are in this most challenging era and I know that you may feel tired physically, but I believe that the heart of a teacher will never get tired. So let us keep the fire burning. Thank you for watching the video and I hope that you really learned something today. Bye bye.